Welcome to the Fashion Masterclass with yours truly, Angela Taylor-George. On this channel, we take a deep dive into all things fashion, and I share with you all the tips, tricks, and insider secrets I've learned working over 4 decades in the fashion industry in New York City. On this episode, we're continuing our discussion on how to start a fashion brand. So if you haven't watched, just know that there are 2 episodes before this, and I'll recap those when we get into the lesson. So class is in session, let's dive in. So I want to thank everybody that's been watching, subscribing, liking, sharing these videos. I'm so excited to get this knowledge out to the world at large, and I just want to thank you. And for those of you that are new coming to the channel, welcome. So we're going to dive into the lesson, and this is the 3rd in a series of lessons on how to start a fashion brand. So I'll just do a quick recap. First lesson, we talked about what is the product, understanding the need for the product or products, identifying your ideal client avatar, determining if the product is valid, doing research, doing online research and marketing research and, going and shopping. And then in the 2nd episode, we really went more into what is this idea? What is this style? Is it one style? Is it many styles? Understanding how to start to put your ideas on paper, refining those ideas, editing those ideas, like coming to an editing process ahead of all the pattern and sample making. So this week, I'm going to segue a little bit. I'm going to talk to you about, before I dive into the pattern making part, I'm going to talk to you about when we're developing our collection, how are we developing the collection? Like, is it a style? Is it a style that we want to create? Is it a fabric that we love, that we want to make something in that fabric? Are we inspired by an art exhibit we saw or a runway show? What is inspiring us to do what we want to do? I have found in my career, I used to be a designer's rep many years ago, and I was the liaison between the designer and the retail store. So I helped launch a lot of fashion brands in the 90s. And what I found over the course of that experience and my experience with Allison Trixie is that how you really make it is either it's a silhouette that becomes like a hit silhouette, or it becomes a fabrication that becomes your signature fabrication. Those are 2 of the ways to really have longevity in the industry and to make money. If hopefully that's what you want to do, is make money, and this isn't just a labor of love. Landing on a fabrication that works for you and being able to, do different silhouettes each season, or landing on a silhouette that you can put in different fabrics each season. That's a way to drive business. I mean, yes, you can come up with a new collection every season and, different items and different fabrications, and every season you're just coming up with something new, and you can definitely go that route. But you will find that there are usually, even within those collections, are signature items, or we call them hero styles, like signature styles that a brand will have success with and they'll run season to season. Sometimes they're running it identical to the way it was the season before. Sometimes they're refabricating it. Sometimes they're tweaking the design slightly, but keeping the essence of what's sold. So it's really, it's really that drives business, because if you're coming out with like brand new styles each season and like starting over, and development costs and pattern costs, it's a little bit of a kind of a treadmill kind of thing. Whereas you will find that you'll land on something that's successful and that you want to maximize that success. That's really where you can begin to make money, because you see something's proven and you know that there's a customer for it, and you can just keep selling it, as I said, in new ways and new fabrics, or new silhouettes in a fabric, or new fabrics in a silhouette. With that, I'm going to dive into the main part of the lesson, which is, what do I do? Now I've developed my line, I've edited myself, I'm ready to go have my patterns made. So I'm going to assume that most of you are not pattern makers. that are watching. So you have to find a pattern maker. So I'll tell you how I started in the industry. When I started, I was already in my showroom, so I already had the buyers that were coming. They trusted me. They knew my showroom was a hot showroom. I always had new collections and like everything that was on the cutting edge of fashion. So I already had the captive audience. So I was really ahead of the game, I have to say, because I had that audience in the wholesale market, all the retail stores that were coming. I decided that I wanted to create a line, and I knew that I had to get patterns made. And I'm in New York City, so I have the luxury of being right in the garment district in New York. So I was able to, there was one friend I had that happened to start a company, a fashion brand, like 2 years before I was starting. And I basically asked them, we had a meeting, I asked them a few questions. They didn't give me a ton of answers. In those days, I'm going back a ways, like people were pretty, competitive. Not that they're not competitive now, but like they weren't basically divulging all this information. Like, go to this pattern service, go to this cutting room, go to this sewing factory. Like, they gave me like a little bit, but the little bit of knowledge that they gave me, I was able to run with. And I did find a pattern service, and that was the beginning. So I found this pattern service, and once again, it's like, I remember going to the pattern service and I'm like, I don't even know if the pattern's right. And then I actually called my friend who came, and he was looking at the pattern, because I didn't even know how to look at a pattern in those days. Like, I could, now today I can, but back then I didn't even know how to look at a pattern. And I have a very funny story that this pattern service, there was one pattern maker, and I could tell at the service, there were a bunch of pattern makers, but I could tell she spoke, not that she spoke, she didn't really speak English, but she understood more English than the other ones. And somehow the way she carried herself, I felt like she was experienced and knew what she was doing. So she was the one making my patterns. And as fate would have it, one day after I made these patterns, I was going down into the subway in New York, and I basically, in those days we had tokens. This was before the Metro card that you swipe. And I remember I was going down into the train, I dropped my token, I went through the turnstile, and who's like coming toward me but this one woman who was the pattern maker from the pattern service. And she barely spoke English, and she said, "I want work for you." That's all I could understand. Like, she wants to work for me. So I was thinking like, well, I said, come to my office. Here's my address. I said, come to my office tomorrow. We'll talk. So she came to my office. She brought me a bag of dumplings. She came to my office, and she ended up being my pattern maker for the next 7 years. But that was kind of the way my story went. So I was lucky that I had an in-house pattern maker. But for those of you that are starting out, it's about finding a pattern service. There are pattern services in New York. And again, there are a lot of companies now, they're not just making patterns, they'll make the pattern, they'll cut and sew your first sample. And then there are also many production companies that will do like a full package. They'll take you from start to finish, going through the sample process. So they'll do it all for you, so you don't have to, farm things out and basically do it on an a la carte basis. You can go to like a one-stop shop. So those places exist. So once again, they'll make the pattern, they'll cut the first sample, they'll sew it and fit it, at least the first sample. And so there's companies that just do that, companies that just make a pattern and say, here's the pattern, you have to go cut and sew it elsewhere. Or you could, have a company that's basically not only doing the pattern, but they could also take you through production as well. There are some companies now that are doing all the steps from the beginning, from the inception to a finished, production product. When I say production product, what does that mean? It means a garment that has been fit for production. When you're making your patterns in the beginning, it's called the first pattern. It's like, in essence, it's a first pattern. It's the first pattern. It's called the first pattern. Makes sense. So that pattern is the one that you will later, if you're going to go to market with it, or you're going to produce it, you're going to actually produce it, you will fit that garment for what we call production. So it's called fit for production. So that means this garment is ready, it has a pattern, the pattern is a good pattern, and it's ready to go on in the process. And I don't want to get too far ahead because there's more steps after that, but I don't want to get into that right now. I really want to stay with the pattern making. So, and with pattern makers, it's just important to know that it's like anything else. Like there are certain pattern makers, like some people specialize in jackets, woven jackets. And we talk about wovens and knits. They're, two different types of fabrics. So some people specialize more in woven, some people specialize more in knits, like t-shirts and leggings, they cut and sew knits, and other people do pants, and other people do dresses and maybe silk dresses, like what we do at Alice and Trixie. We do different things. We do silk dresses, we do jackets, we do pants. We've done knits in the past, but the pattern maker's hand is different. Some pattern makers will excel, so you kind of want to know what your pattern maker skill set is when you find your pattern maker, because a pattern maker that can make a t-shirt maybe can't make a pant, or a pattern that can make a blazer can't make a silk dress. Like some people are just good at like structured garments, like jackets, pants, that's like a structured garment. What I'm wearing is like a silk soft woven blouse, and this is maybe takes a different hand, a different pattern maker to make that. Luckily, a pattern maker that does everything. He could make jackets, he could make pants, he could make, anything you give him. He can make whatever you give him. He's just really a good all-around pattern maker. That's not always the case, and often not the case, in fact. So it's about, understanding if you're a pattern maker, and usually the pattern makers will tell you if they can make what you want or not. And also, as far as a pattern maker goes, it's like, if you don't have like this perfect sketch, when you're giving it to a pattern maker, I think it's really important to at least have some type of illustration of what you're looking for. If you can't communicate with like specs, like specifications, or like measurements, finishes, it's really important to at least maybe you buy a sample to show them what you're talking about, or a tear sheet to show them how you want the garment to fall. It's really good because it's about setting your pattern maker up for success, because you have to imagine, in your head what you want, right? But if you're giving somebody like some sketch that's not that great and doesn't show like a dart, if there's supposed to be a dart, or like gathering, if there's supposed to be like shearing or gathering, if it's not showing that, the pattern maker has no idea what you want. So it's so important to communicate with your pattern maker from the onset, because otherwise you will waste your time and you won't get what you want. You'll be disappointed, and it's not a successful partnership in that way. And it's disappointing, especially when you've created something, you're so excited, you're going to see the sample, say it's in a pattern service and they cut and sew the sample, and you go see it and you're like, this isn't what I wanted, but it's really on you to make sure that you're able to communicate your idea. Again, you don't have to have gone to Parsons or FIT or Central St. Martin's. You don't have to have gone to a fashion school to do this. You can, as long as your pattern maker can read you, that's the most important thing. I did not study, when I went to FIT, I studied fashion buying and merchandising. I was not a design major. But I can sketch something, I can get my idea across, I can show with measurements, I can show things on a form, I can show with maybe, like a tear sheet of like an idea of how I want something to drape, for instance. You really have to be able to, so important that your pattern maker understands what you want. Again, you have to look at it and know how to communicate your ideas to make sure you get what you want. In the end, and then everybody's happy. Over time, the good thing is that if you're working with somebody and it's working out, they will get, you have like this telepathic thing, and then there's like a shorthand that's involved, and it's like they know what you want when they see a sketch look a certain way. But that takes time, that you develop that over time. But it's beautiful when you can get with somebody. And also finishing, I just want to say, as far as like when we're making the sample, you want to know what the finishing is. And what do I mean by finishing? I mean, like, my top has like a top stitch. It's got like an 1/8 top stitch, so it's an 1/8 inch in with a top stitch. This has, how many rows of this is elastic and it stretches, how many rows of smocking. This is smocking, so how many rows of smocking? Things like that, like the way it's finished. Sometimes, is it a top stitch? Is it a blind stitch? Is it, when you have something that has like a neckline, you have what's called like a facing. Is there a facing? Is there a binding? Those are what we call finishes. But I'll probably get more into that later, but I just wanted to give you just a little bit of an understanding of it. But in the meantime, I think, look, I'm happy you're here because you are learning, how it's done. And that's the most important thing, because I don't want you to lose money. You know what I mean? Because you can lose money in this industry like really quickly if you're not learning. And the people I coach, like I work with them, and we talk about how we're going to do things efficiently. And again, like you don't want to be sinking money into styles that like I said, previously, like you're making so many similar styles that it's confusing customers. They're only buying one. And if you think about all the time and effort that it takes for you to develop one style, working with your pattern maker, having it cut and sewn, fitting the garment on a model, making those corrections, think about all the people involved. You have a cutter, you have a pattern maker, you have a sewer, you have a fit model, your time, can't put a price on that, right? This is 5 people to make a style that is similar to like 4 other styles. So it's a lot of waste can happen. And again, costly, very costly mistakes. So it's important that when you're starting out that you come on channels like this, get as much information as you can. I don't think there are channels like this. This is the only channel like this on YouTube, but get your, do your research. Do as much research as you possibly can so you can not make costly mistakes. So what I'd love for you to do is, if you haven't seen the previous episodes, jump in and watch the previous episodes. So if you got value, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share this content. I'm sure you have friends that could use this information. Share this content and jump into the Facebook group. Really important, the Fashion Masterclass. There, I go in live, I can answer questions. Leave your comments down below. Leave the comments on what you want to know more about, what you'd like to learn, what you want me to teach you. I'd love to I want to be able to guide you and give you the information you need to succeed, because I know you will succeed in this industry. Keep going, and I believe in you. And Chloe believes in you too. She knows you can do it. Chloe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. No, that sucked.
I wasn't very convinced.
I know. Okay. Oh.